Hello.
Oh, there we are. Now I hear you. Do you
Uh,
hear me?
yeah, I can hear you clearly. Thank you very much for accepting my invitation and finding time for us. Uh, my name is Evgeny. This is Henrique. He is my translator.
Hello,
And
I will be
Hello.
supporting Evgeny today. Nice to meet you. Thank you for your time.
My
yeah,
pleasure.
if I couldn't explain something to you or if I cannot understand something, I will ask him if you do not mind. Is it okay?
Sure.
Okay, thank you. Professor Carscadon, internet sources say that you are one of the most prominent American researchers in sleep. You received your PhD in neuro and by behavioral science at Stanford University, and you are the professor in the Department of Psychiatry and Human Behavior. Uh, Also, you are director of the Sleep and Chronobiology Research Lab at Bradley Hospital. And you are considered as an expert on sleep and circadian rhythms during childhood, adolescence, and young adulthood. Is it correct?
Yes, although I think the way you phrase things may have had a misunderstanding. I am a professor in the psychiatry department at Brown University Medical School.
Yeah, sorry. It's
No worries.
at Brown University. So, as you already know, since March of this year, a single time zone was introduced in Kazakhstan, uh, as a result of which in one part of the country, the sun began to rise at 3:15 a.m., while in another part of the country, the sunrise began at approximately 5:40 a.m. As a result of this, many people began to complain of early awakenings at 3, 4 a.m., followed by an inability to fall asleep. They talk about how the sun starts shining brightly at 4 a.m., the birds are singing, and that they just can't sleep anymore. They wake up early in the morning, stay awake for about 1 hour or 1 hour with half, and then fall asleep again. Wake up for work at 8 a.m. maybe because the working day in Kazakhstan starts at 9 a.m. And then they feel tired all day. Some people complain of increased symptoms of chronic diseases or headaches. Other people have trouble with concentrating, a feeling of chronic fatigue and irritability. Can you explain, please, what could be the cause of these conditions?
Thank you for asking the question. I mean, I think if you think about our planet and the sun rise and sunset and the way things seem to be going now, many people in Kazakhstan are living in a constant state of jet lag. And so their bodies rhythms are not synchronized well to the daylight and darkness. One of the things I like to point out, which I think we forget sometimes, is that the term midnight, 12 a.m. or p.m., however you're counting, is actually an accurate phrase. It's the middle of darkness. So when the time zones get way out of proportion to that, it also shows you very clearly how much the government setting time zones in a funny way interferes with what actually from the dawn of timekeeping, the midnight term was meant to be. Now, few of us in modern society live according to midnight being the middle of our nights. Maybe, some people who are living out in the country may, but it's it just doesn't make sense to have such a range for people to try and adjust to. I mean, it doesn't matter that your time of working is still 9 a.m. when the sun has been up for 5-6 hours before then. And then I also want to think about the other edge of the time when the sunset may be happening at 3 or 4 in the afternoon, even before your workday ends. And when you think about, I'm sure there are people who work on farms or orchards and so forth in your country. Well, they don't have that 9 a.m. option anywhere. They have to get up to, the cows are awake, the sheep are awake, the chickens are awake, the plants are awake. And so they have to really adjust their day to the time clock. And then that makes them out of synchrony with the rest of Kazakhstan society, who has this ostensible 9 a.m. start of their workday. It's too far out of the range that humans can adapt to easily. Now, there are some people who are morning larks, and this may be good for them. That may be, 1% of the population. So it's too few people who might benefit from that type of schedule. And, you have such a breadth of distance between the ends of the time zone. It just, some people will be maybe advantaged by it, but most people will be at a disadvantage.
Thank you. I feel the same. And, 3 months have passed and people still have not adapted. Is it even possible to adapt to such a schedule?
Impossible. That's a big word. I think it's maybe impossible for most people to adapt. And here's the thing, it's, the signals that your brain gets that set your internal clock are out of the range to which humans can be captured by the clock. So it's just very, very extreme challenge. I think maybe, if you really got blackout curtains on the windows, and then, had bright light at different times, and it's just to organize the public health response that would be required, I think is just out of the possibility for most people and most countries to try to implement. It's a huge challenge.
Yeah, old people and people with chronic disorders adapt more difficultly.
Well, it sort of depends which end of the time zone you're on. I think the adolescents would be most challenged by the very early edge of your time zone, sunrise edge of the time zone, because during adolescent development, the circadian rhythms move later. And so it's much harder to wake up early and hard to fall asleep early. And so the consequence is that your adolescents are even more in a situation of sort of continuous jet lag that really impairs the amount of sleep they get, which then works forward to their cognitive abilities, their emotional regulation, and I don't know, if I were a teenager living in these circumstances, I'd be one angry teen. So I think, the emotion regulation is really hard. And I think that their success in school will be impacted. There lots of times when teenagers don't have enough sleep, they'll also do more risk-taking and risky behaviors that can end up, in injuries and worse. So I think, and you mentioned that some people, even after 3 months, are already having physical challenges. due to the time zone. And part of that, I mean, the headaches are probably part of it, and not getting enough sleep can also contribute to headaches. But there's also, if they're not getting enough sleep, which it seems is true from what you say about people being very sleepy, there are other physical conditions that can be affected. And so, the sort of central one is inflammatory conditions in the body that can lead to diabetes and kidney disease, and really long term can have significant health challenges that I don't think the Kazakhstani government would be in favor of seeing in their population. I don't, it's strange to me how government sometimes doesn't think enough about health and the ramifications of things. In the United States, and I think some of the European countries, there's now an argument about, do we stay on summertime year round, or do we stay on wintertime year round? And the health and knowledgeable people know that wintertime is more aligned to the geophysical time, the Earth's rotation. And so midnight actually is the middle of the night, whether it's summer or winter, when we're on, the winter time, or we call it standard time here. When we're on summertime, or daylight saving time, it's called, that's now thrown off from midnight being the middle of darkness. So it's a debate everywhere. I remember when the United States government said, let's stay on summertime year round, people reacted the same way you've described, especially in the wintertime when it put darkness way too early in the evening for people living in the northern latitudes. I should have looked at the atlas to see where Kazakhstan stands in terms of what the dimensions are this way, not to mention this way, because people who are living in the north get a very different sunlight signal than people living in the south. And I don't know if you've looked at that either, but that means in the wintertime, darkness falls earlier for the people in the northern latitudes than the southern latitudes. And so this new system could actually exacerbate that difference as well. It's a big challenge.
As one of the solutions, it was proposed to go to bed early, before 10 o'clock in the evening, and start school or work earlier. Our teenagers go to bed quite late, often after midnight. They play computer games, they use gadgets, they chat with friends on messengers. How realistic is it to get them to sleep earlier, and will it lead to more sleep deprivation? Some people say that they will not go to bed earlier, but will start getting up earlier. So,
well, which means the sleep they get at night will be less and less and less, right? There's a lot of evidence in teenagers that their rhythms push for later bedtimes and later times to wake up. It's hard to fight against that. I mean, that's their biological propensity. And yes, part of what plays out with that is, my brain wants me to stay up. I can play this video game or chat with my friends, and they're not sleepy. Now, the public health issue is also here in the United States, where the topic is the starting time of school for the teenagers, because when school starts so early, not as early as sunrise that you described in areas of Kazakhstan, but even a 7 a.m. school start time is too early for teens. And so they lose sleep, and then they're sleepy, and they're taking risks, and they're crashing cars and having a lot of cognitive challenges. And so the public health response to that is not, let's make them go to bed earlier so they can get enough sleep to get up earlier. Let's try and move the starting time for school later to make a bigger window between bedtime and the time they have to get up to go to school. And that's been quite successful in many of the school districts. We don't have the same kind of, it feels like you have more top-down regulations in Kazakhstan than we have, but for schools, it's, you know, it's town by town by town. So it's a moving target. Anyway, I think it's a mistake to think that teenagers will go to bed early and wake up early.
Parents complain that small children have begun to wake up in the middle of the night, and it is difficult to put them to sleep. Can waking up early affect children's health?
I think so. Again, the data haven't been gathered quite yet, but to the extent that it's narrowing the amount of sleep that the kids get, then I think there's pretty good likelihood that it will affect health in general, and maybe growth and so forth. You want to be careful with the little ones, especially because there's so many developmental processes going on that when you interfere by putting a mandate on all the families that, sunrise is 3 o'clock or whatever it was you mentioned, that's a challenge. So maybe if everyone were given blackout curtains so they could have the child and their bedrooms be dark, even after sunrise, that might help. But who can afford to give everyone blackout curtains?
Actually, it doesn't work. You can see I have a blackout curtains, but I still wake up in the morning because I don't know why. Maybe level of cortisol is drastically increased, maybe something else. I cannot explain.
Well, a part of it is the signal that you get when you do get up and when you're out and about, and the sunrise is early, sunset is early. All those signals contribute to your timing of things. And so if you're waking up at 3 a.m. and you don't have to go to work till 9 a.m., that's doesn't make any sense.
Yeah. Is there an optimal time for sunrise?
Well, no. And the reason I say that is we live on a planet that has, a tilted axis. So that means that we have this seasonal change in both our daylight and darkness exposure and the timing of sunrise and sunset. So I can't say there's an optimal. That said, if you think about midnight as the middle of night and then figure out the day length, the daylight length, and sort of figure out, well, okay, if we have maybe 14 hours of daylight, then 7 a.m. sounds like a good time for sunrise, right? But it does change throughout the year, and there's no way, you can't control that because that's the planet we live on and the sun that's shining on us.
In winter, sunset will occur at 3 p.m. or 3:30 p.m. In our region, people are deficient in vitamin D. Will this somehow affect children and adolescents' health?
I think there's a real possibility. I mean, I think if they're, sure, if they get up early and they're exposed to daylight, for 3-4 hours before school starts, but I can't imagine that teenager or even that child. So the vitamin D deficiency, I hadn't thought about that. If they're not getting daylight, and if, sunset is at 3 p.m., there's no day left there's no light left at the end of the school day. And, there's no time to go out and play. or do their sports or what have you. I really hope that you and other scientists in Kazakhstan will be able to convince your government that this is a bad plan. And, you know, you need probably from the materials you sent. So here in my country, we have 4 time zones, and that works pretty well. And I don't know, you had mentioned, I think 3 time zones in your country seem to work better. Certainly would be better than 1 time zone from what you've described. So it may be time just to say, oh, well, maybe we made a mistake and we should go back and get back on track with a reasonable set of time zones.
I have 2 questions. Some experts talk about the concept of natural time. We must live entirely in accordance with natural time, rise with the sun and go to bed with the darkness. How realistic is this in the modern world? What do you think about this?
Well, again, as I mentioned, for the people who are working the land and on the farms and the orchards and so forth, that may be really good for them. But those people living, you know, in an industrialized society, I mean, Kazakhstan has very, you know, I looked at a little bit of the material, and you're a very advanced nation, and it just doesn't make sense in the modern world for us to live entirely by sunrise and sunset. It just is out of what is feasible for us to go to have our jobs and do our work, you know, and we all have electric lights that are changing our exposure to daylight and darkness. I mean, sun may set, but we're still getting light from our electric lights. So I don't think it's a reasonable suggestion to society-wide. Maybe back in the, I don't know, prehistoric times, it was the only option, but we have more options, which doesn't mean that the natural environment isn't important and doesn't have important effects on our lives.
And the final questions. How long does it take to become an expert in chronobiology? What level of education is needed?
That's a fascinating question. So as you mentioned at the start, so I have a bachelor's degree, so I went to college. Then I worked for a while in a laboratory, and then I got my doctoral degree. And so that took a while, more than a minute. And along the way, I learned a lot from working with other scientists who knew more and could mentor me and could teach me and give me the materials to read and so forth. So it does take a lot of focus and interest. Now, one of the new things that's coming up with chronobiology and circadian rhythms is a new initiative for what's called, actually, there's a new society. It's called the International Association for Circadian Health Clinics. And so, in fact, they're going to have webinars around the globe for people to go to learn. But, you know, learning is part, this kind of learning, part understanding the methods and the terminology, and then seeing where it applies to what you do. So I'm still learning, to tell you the truth. I mean, you mentioned, or, you know, gave me credit for my expertise, but as I sent to you some other names of people from whom I am constantly learning. So I think you're a psychologist, you know, learning is a lifetime of joy.
Thank you. This is a great answer. Is there anything else you would like to say to the citizens of Kazakhstan?
Rybakina, did I pronounce that right? the woman tennis player, who I think plays under the Kazakhstan flag.
Uh-huh.
And the people, I'm a tennis fan. So the tennis federation in Kazakhstan said, come here, we will support you. We will help you become a world champion in tennis. And boy, is she ever playing well. So that's the only other thing that I wanted to mention, how proud I am of Kazakhstan for stepping up and giving her really what she needed to be, what she is today.
Thank you very much, Professor Carscadon. You provided us a invaluable help.
Well, let
Well-
me know how things play out as the government is, contemplating revising their decision.
Okay, in 1 month, I will send a message to you and I will say the result of our discussion in government.
Okay, my fingers are crossed for the people of Kazakhstan.
Thank you. Goodbye.
Be well. Bye.